You'd think for Stephen Hendry it would be hard to choose a favourite World Championship triumph. Amongst his 7 are of course his first in 1990, where he became the youngest ever player to win the World Championship, aged 21, a record that still stands. You might be tempted to pick one of the 5 who won in succession between 1992 and 1996, which spanned a record 29 consecutive wins at the Crucible. But it's definitely his 7th that's his best. Not my words, they are the words of Stephen Hendry. Let me explain. As I've mentioned, Stephen Hendry dominated the 90s. We all know that. And despite that incredible run of Crucible victories coming to an end in the 1997 final against Ken Doherty, no one really thought that Hendry's days of dominance were over. Although this faith did begin to wane a little bit the season after, Hendry didn't feature at all in the 1998 final. That final was contested between John Higgins and again Ken Doherty, Higgins denying Doherty his 2nd consecutive title. The crucial thing about that result, John Higgins knocked his fellow Scott Hendry off the top of the rankings for the first time since 1990. 8 years! A few months later, when the following season was well underway, Stephen Hendry suffered his most brutal loss as a professional. In the first round of the UK Championship, he came up against Marcus Campbell and was eviscerated 9-0. 9-0! Stephen Hendry lost 9-0. This result, of course, came as a shock to absolutely everybody in the snooker world, except Stephen Hendry. After the match, he said, "This has been building up for ages. There are 1 or 2 technical things that need tweaking, but basically, it's an attitude problem." Even his opponent Campbell picked up on this mental turmoil. Stephen seemed like he was strolling around the table with a million problems on his mind. But this is Stephen Hendry we're talking about, and the bad times were, of course, not to last. Fast forward to April 99, and Stephen Hendry rocks up at the Crucible on the back of 3 event wins. He looked to be firing again, and so it proved. Hendry began with a tough 10-8 victory against Paul Hunter, but followed it up with a more comfortable 13-7 win against James Watner. Matthew Stevens was then dispatched 13-5, very impressive considering Stevens went on to reach the final the following year. It was Ronnie O'Sullivan in the semi-final. Hendry roared past him with a 17-13 victory, setting up a final with another member of the class of 92, Mark Williams, and an emphatic 18-11 win gave Hendry that all-important 7th title, thus establishing himself as snooker's statistical greatest
at the time.
After winning, Hendry immediately reflected on that 9-0 Marcus Campbell defeat in the UK Championship. "That night, I never thought I'd challenge for any title again, let alone be a realistic contender at the Crucible. Without doubt, this is my finest hour. After the terrible spell I went through, this means more to me than the first 6 titles put together. I've got nothing left to prove to anybody, and that's a good feeling. This was my last burning ambition in snooker. I wanted to set myself apart from the rest." The rest of Hendry's career sort of showed just how significant and pressure-relieving this moment was. As we know, it proved to be his last World Championship triumph, and successes elsewhere began to dry up after this. That's not to say Hendry was poor during the noughties at all. In fact, he regained top spot in the rankings from May 2006 to May 2007. He then became the oldest World Championship semi-finalist at age 39. That has since been exceeded multiple times by the class of 92. And at his last appearance in the World Championship, he made a maximum to send himself out on a deserved high. But yep, that's the story of why Stephen Hendry's 7th and final title was his most significant to him, to his fans, to the snooker world. Subscribe to Simple Snooker for more history and nonsense, but mainly nonsense.